To think, abstract, run for your lives. This is how Hegel dramatically begins an essay of his titled Wer denkt abstrakt, or in English, Who Thinks Abstractly. It's an essay wrote during the period of his lectures in Berlin towards the end of his career, where Hegel states clearly his aversion to the abstract thinking. Yes, you heard it well. Hegel, one of the philosophers commonly considered as the most abstract thinker of the whole human history, presents himself as an enemy of abstract thinking. How is this possible? What does abstract mean for Hegel? And why is he so commonly misunderstood? In this video, by analyzing this text, we are going to search for an answer to these questions. Hegel was one of the most influential philosophers in Western history, and a central figure in German idealism. His philosophy is fascinating but very complex. I would personally say that his masterpiece titled Logic is for sure one of the most challenging texts ever produced by human mind. At the very base, Hegel attempts to explain how reality, thought, and history develop through a rational and dynamic process. One of Hegel's most famous ideas is the dialectic method, which describes this progress as a conflict between opposing forces. These forces are a thesis, an idea or a state of affairs, its antithesis or its contradiction, and their resolution in a synthesis, which then becomes a new thesis in an ongoing cycle. This dialectic process, according to Hegel, drives both human thought and historical change. Hegel also developed the concept of absolute idealism, arguing that reality is fundamentally shaped by an evolving and self-aware consciousness. He believed that history follows a rational structure, moving toward a great freedom and self-realization. As he famously said, "The truth is the whole." This means that reality can only be fully understood when seen in its complete, interconnected development, not just in isolated parts. One of his most important works, The Phenomenology of Spirit, explores how human consciousness evolves from simple perception to absolute knowledge. His influence extends far beyond philosophy into politics, history, art, or religion. Thinkers such as Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Jean-Paul Sartre engaged deeply with his ideas, either by developing them further or challenging them. Hegel's work remains essential for understanding modern thought, as it emphasizes the connection between ideas, history, and human freedom. Whether you agree with him or not, his impact on philosophy is undeniable. The way Hegel begins this essay is very interesting because it seems, at least at the beginning, that he is leading a strong, ironic critique of the society of his time, especially the intellectual milieu. A critique that, apart from some examples related to his historical context, is perfectly valid nowadays. Namely the fact that even the sound of the words thinking and abstract, which are associated to metaphysics and philosophy, create the same effect in people as the plague infection. Everyone just flees. But a few lines later, Hegel clears his position by explaining what this text is not about, as it may seem in appearance from the title. It's not about an explanation of what abstract and thinking are. People are not interested in avoiding abstract thinking because they actually know what it is. He writes, "Nothing is more intolerable to the elegant world than an explanation. For me personally, it's dreadful enough when someone begins to explain something. In case of need, I can understand everything on my own." On the other hand, his intention is neither to promote a sneaky reconciliation between the intellectual society and the abstract thinking. He doesn't want the society to accept the abstract thinking as some kind of old friend. So if Hegel's aim is not to reconcile the elegant world with the abstract thinking, not to engage with something difficult and complex, and neither to point out that dealing with such matter is appropriate for a creature equipped with reason, then what is this purpose? It's clearly stated in the title, to ask ourselves, who thinks abstractly? Hegel writes, the intention is rather to reconcile the refined world with itself, if it does not otherwise feel any remorse for this neglect, but nevertheless harbors at least an inner respect for abstract thought, considering it something elevated, and turns away from it not because it deems it too insignificant, but because it regards it as too lofty, not because it's too common, but because it's too noble. The problem with the intellectual world is that they still keep a certain relationship to the abstract thought, either because of this unjustified respect, or, as Hegel writes some lines later, as something extravagant to be avoided in the society. Either way, they and we live in a big misunderstanding about the idea of abstract. By asking who thinks abstract and showing it with examples, Hegel reveals at the same time what is an abstract thought. The answer to this question is only one: the uneducated person, not the educated one. Good society does not think abstractly because it's too easy, too lowly. This lowliness is not based on external rank, nor on an empty snobbishness that dismisses what it cannot grasp, but rather on the inner triviality of the matter. To prove his point, Hegel makes some examples, and this is where it gets interesting. A woman goes to the local market and says to an old seller, "Old woman, your eggs are rotten." "What? My eggs rotten? You are rotten yourself. You dare to tell me this about my eggs? You? Wasn't your father who died drunk on the roadside? Didn't your mother run away with another man? And didn't your grandmother die alone in a hospital? Get yourself a whole shirt first instead of that miserable scarf around your neck. Everyone knows where you get this scarf from. If it weren't for the officers, some women wouldn't be so well dressed. And if the housewives paid more attention to their husbands, many of these women would be in prison. Just leave and patch up the holes in your socks." The reaction of this woman to the comment is quite exaggerated, but it helps to understand Hegel's point. The saleswoman doesn't forgive her for anything. She thinks abstractly, reducing the buyer entirely to the crime of having declared her eggs rotten, judging her by her scarf, her shirt, her family, and so on. Everything about her is completely and totally tainted with rotten eggs. Meanwhile, those officers that the marked woman mentioned, if indeed there is any truth about it, which is highly doubtful, may have noticed quite different things about the same woman. A murderer is about to be executed for his crime. What do people see? Some ladies might remark that he is strong, handsome, that his resolute but sad side is fascinating. Other people might find this observation absurd and unmoral. They might think that you cannot associate a murderer with beauty. If there is a priest between these people who supposedly knows the hearts of men, he may add, "This must be the moral corruption of the upper class." But what does an expert of human soul think about this murderer? He would investigate the path that led the criminal's development. He may find in his history a poor education, bad family conditions, some extreme punishment for minor guilt which embittered him against the civil order, an initial reaction against the society that drove him away, making it possible for him now to survive only through crime. Some people may react by saying, "You're just trying to justify the murderer." Well, those people are the ones who think abstract. Hegel writes, "This means thinking abstractly, seeing in the murderer nothing but this abstraction, that he is a murderer, and through this simple quality erasing all the other aspects of his human existence." In the same example, an old lady, a hospital beggar, looks at the same man whom was sentenced death. Suddenly, she destroys very simply the abstraction of the murder and restores him to the honor of life. The cut-off head of the murderer had been placed on the scaffold and the sun was shining. "How beautiful," said the old woman, "that the sun of God's grace also shines upon his head." For these simple words, the old lady lifted him from the punishment of the scaffold into the grace of God's Son, by seeing him received into the mercy of the higher light. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Ivan and this is Empyreon, the Academy of Philosophy and Fine Arts.